On today's episode, we say, man, forget the German motor. Let's go all American with, you guessed it, an LS swap. Because that's what we all do. Just kidding. Of course, we're going to keep working on our original motor here, and it may actually get swapped in today. Normally Mike wouldn't be installing the rocker arms and shafts this late in the game, but we've been waiting on these for about a couple weeks now. I'm not sure if they were back order or what. However, they've arrived, so Mike's gonna drop them in here, set the valve lash, and we'll pretty much be done with the engine. Rocker's going in now. Requires a little bit of finesse with the shaft there because there's 2 O-rings on it, so it's a tight fit.
All the way down, back it off.
Each and every rocker has to be adjusted manually. See the feeler gauge going on there. Now we're close, perfect. And then it gets tightened up. So this procedure has to have the piston at top dead center. The camshaft is also at fully closed, right?
Yeah, fully closed. Each respective cylinder is TDC, so there's no adjustment, or no, excuse me, no tension.
Right
on the rocker.
On the rocker. Unlike conventional belts, this one actually doesn't have an adjuster pulley or a method to really adjust the length. The only way to do it is through the spacers on there, right?
Shims, yep.
Shims. So we're gonna get a lesson here how this is done properly.
You get a lesson. I'm not sure if you'll get a lesson on how it's done properly or not. You get a lesson.
You weren't kidding. Things like super stiff. So when do you know it's tight enough?
There's a torque spec on it. I don't remember the exact number, but 30 foot-pounds or something.
Good?
Yep.
Good. Oh, and you'll also notice that is a genuine Porsche belt. Nothing but the best here. This valve cover, can we call this job, this engine build, complete on the rack here or what?
Yep.
Yes, indeed.
Valve covers and spark plugs, and this is done.
Oh yeah, spark plugs, but we'll just pretend they're in there. And you folks can admire this engine once again. We're gonna be pulling it off the engine stand. We gotta bolt the clutch on, transmission, and then we can put it in the car. The excitement is high once again. We're getting close to completion here. If you're wondering what the proper torque spec is for spark plugs, we're doing 19 to 21 foot-pounds.
All right, so ignition on this car is going to be coil on plug ignition. There's going to be no distributor. If we look at the motor, it's already got a block off plug. Closes off the original hole right here. Why do we run no distributor? Well, the original distributors are usually pretty worn out at this point. They need new seals, they need new bushings. They've got centrifugal advance, they've got a worn out vacuum retard pot on the side of it.
It's just kind of old technology.
Absolutely, just get rid of all of that. The ECU is controlling the timing anyway. So to get rid of that play in the timing, and also to clean it up so you don't have a big, massive spark plug wires running everywhere, especially on like a twin plug conversion, you just go straight to coil on plug. It's a lot tighter. You got just really small wires feeding it here.
Yeah, it looks super clean.
Yeah, super clean. So these end up like pretty much every modern car has got coil on plug. So you got individual coils right in the ends of them.
Yep.
And super tidy. Most ECUs don't have the high current ignition driver built into the ECU because these generate a lot of heat.
Right.
So your options are either inductive or CDI. This one's going to be inductive ignition. But to take that low current signal out of the ECU and amplify it into something that's going to drive the coil, you have to run it through an ignition amplifier, also called an igniter or a coil module. So that's why we have two of these. Each one's a 3-channel, and they're mounted on an aluminum plate as a heat sink. So it's a good, reliable setup.
Yeah, and they're from AAM,
Yes,
which
they are.
is always a good thing for me. I love those guys. This sensor is critical to make sure that we have both camshafts in sync then, so the ECU can tell.
The sync signal for the ECU.
Yeah.
All right, so what we did here, we did this part off camera, but we changed this lower flange on this intercooler to a vibrant van gen. And the reason we did that is the other style factory pipe for the factory turbocharger fits over a male interface O-ring similar to this. The issue being with the factory setup, you also have a captured O-ring on the
bottom
factory
side,
turbo,
right? Yeah.
which keeps that pipe centered so it can't come off. Since we've gone to an aftermarket turbo, we no longer have anything pushing up against here to hold that coupler in place or that O-ring seal, because we're now using a flexible coupler at the bottom. So what we did is we converted this to a vibrant van gen, which is actually, I consider this to be a flexible hard coupling. So it has an O-ring on the outside of the flange on both flanges.
Yeah.
And then it has a mating sleeve, and I'm actually going to pull this O-ring off so you can see it. The way this works is this sleeve will slide over this guy, and it'll also slide over here, and then
it kind of locks the two in place, but it's still flexible.
Right, the clamp will go over the outside of that, and that that grabs that lower edge down here, so this can still move around independently of this flange.
I've never used one of these before, so it's pretty neat to see it.
They work really well.
They're good for high boost pressure too, right?
Oh yeah, I don't think you could put enough pressure to that to actually shear this lip off. That allows things to move around and stay happy, and not get any cracking in this thin aluminum tubing. It also allows for ease of serviceability. So if we got to take this pipe off, literally pull this pin and unsnap that clasp, and then open this guy up and pull it off.
Exactly. Yeah.
It takes way less time than taking hose clamps off or any of that stuff, and you're left with a more positive mating flange. So we changed that, and then we had to work with this kind of oddball angle here, so we ended up fabricating a new pipe. Which
looks awesome, by the way, John. Once again, your skills impress me beyond words.
Thanks. And we also added your Turbo Smart bypass valve, which is necessary to go to a larger valve, because we're obviously going to a way larger turbo. It's going to flow more air, so that should get you good to go.
Yeah, and that thing's going to be front and center.
Yep. So that's going to mount. It's going to live. Let's see if I can put it in here. Right. Like that. Obviously, we got to put the rest.
Yeah, we'll put the clamp on, but yeah, it's going to look good. So I'm going to end up painting this tomorrow, so the next time you see it, it's going to be all black. As I'm sure you're aware by now, with the EFI conversion and running an Infinity AAM, we're also going to need a way to monitor the engine's vital signs, and we're going to be using a bunch of AAM sensors. This one being the fuel pressure, so we've hooked it up into the return line off of the regulator and going into the 0 to 100 psi fluid sensor from AEM. We've also got oil pressure, which is going to be critical for us to have. So that's plumbed into the oil line right there. We have a 3.5 bar map sensor that we're also running, so that's going to be critical for boost. And last, actually I shouldn't say last, there's one more after this, but that is our oil temperature sensor. We're going to be monitoring that as well. And we have air inlet temperature. So with all of these, Tony's going to be able to set up a lot of actual safety features. So for example, if the fuel pressure drops off, the engine will either shut off or protect itself. Same thing with oil pressure and intake temperature and oil temperature. So these are all actually very critical in the process of having a good tune and a solid, reliable one. It's been a long time coming, but we're finally ready to take the engine off the engine stand and start buttoning up the clutch. I think we've got the oil cooler to do, right, Mike?
Yes.
And we can put the freshly rebuilt transmission on as well. That right there is it. That's the last time this engine's gonna see an engine stand. It's now on a jack. We're gonna start working on the back side here. So this rear main seal, if you screw this up, you're probably guaranteed to have a leak.
Yes.
And that's why they've got a special tool for this. Check that out. Goes in once, goes in right. You want it as flush as possible?
As straight as possible, and yeah, pretty much flush.
Here's my clutch of choice. It is a spec stage 2 unit, and the reason why I went with this is it's rated to handle 575 foot-pounds of torque, which should be adequate enough for what this engine's gonna make. And the other reason is it's actually going to be very streetable. So you see this Kevlar material here with a steel backing. This is really good for the street, so it's not going to have harsh engagement or anything like that. It should drive pretty much like stock. Here's specs aluminum flywheel. It weighs 5.2 pounds. And here's my original steel flywheel, which weighs 9 pounds. But the sad part of this story is I'm actually going to have to run the steel flywheel, because if you look and see these little notches here, Chris had to have these custom machined, and the reason why I need those is because they're for the crank trigger. So, and you can't do that in aluminum because obviously it's not going to pick up the signal, which means I'm going to have to run this one. But if you're doing a clutch change on your 930, my recommendation is this flywheel, obviously, because it's almost half the weight of the original one. What's our torque rating on that?
62 foot-pounds.
62 foot-pounds. Once again, there's our spec stage 2 clutch. I'm really anxious to try this thing out and see how street friendly it is, because my whole goal with this car is to keep it as streetable as possible. But just by judging by the face of this disc, it should be as streetable as they come. To say the pressure plate on this is light would be completely incorrect.
Yes.
But That's because it's got to have a lot of torque capacity, right?
Well, that, and it's part of what they did to kind of take away some of the spooky nature of the car. When they were lightweight on the 76, 77 cars, it's part of what made the car feel really twitchy. So part of not killing their clients is muting the car a little bit and putting in a really heavy pressure plate was part of that. Plus it also made room for that enormous rubber-centered clutch disc it used to have. And that was that famous NVH disc that helped quiet all the noise of the gearbox.
But made the pedal feel very numb.
Yes. So the trade-off is you can get an aluminum pressure plate that's aftermarket and it's very stiff pedal, or you can get one that has a very soft, like factory pedal, only the pressure plates are very expensive. So the spec came through with a upgraded pressure plate. It's just built on a factory one, so it's pretty heavy.
But durable, I hope.
Should be quite durable. Able to take this torque and still give good pedal effort, not be unreasonably stiff.
And that's exactly what I'm looking for. One of the last items left for assembly was the oil cooler here. And I assume it's just easier to put on at the end, Mike?
No, actually, this would have been on a long time ago.
Okay.
Because of the engine yoke that we had on here.
Oh, right.
It didn't allow
right.
clearance to put it on, so
Creates an interference.
we just left it till last.
I gotcha. That makes total sense now. Now that we've got this hole cut in the bell housing, that is for our trigger, right? Crank
Yep.
trigger?
That's for the crank trigger right here. So the factory's method is to read off of the flywheel. So we took the factory flywheel here, we cut these timing teeth into the perimeter of it, and it's a really reliable signal. It gets good airflow up over the signal, over the sensor, so the sensor stays nice and cool.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's also out of harm's way. Some people like to do a crank pulley, but we've seen belts break and then the belt whips around and it hits the sensor and wipes out the sensor in the bracket and you're dead in the water. This is a really robust setup. So the factory 4-speed is an incredibly durable transmission, but was never used with EFI, whereas all the later gearboxes have a big window cut out to clear the sensors. So
I gotcha.
Simple, just die grinder, make a clearance notch in it, and then we're gonna load this guy on here and get it ready to install in the car.
Fantastic. Now comes the fun part of wiggling the transmission on.
Need that for a second. Hold it.
Well, once again, our time has come to an end here, and we are this close to getting the old engine up into the chassis, but it's gonna have to wait until next week. And double unfortunately, I'm actually leaving for a bit, so Mike and Chris are gonna take care of putting this engine back up, and when I get back, we're gonna end up buttoning everything up, get the ECU installed, get this thing tuned, and make some power. So there's a lot of really cool, exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. Make sure you tune in because it's gonna be awesome.